Tonight, global power play, the high-stakes meeting between President Biden and the President of China.
We're going to compete vigorously, but I'm not looking for conflict. I'm looking to manage this competition responsibly.
Plus, the dust settles. After hard-fought midterm elections, the Democrats retain control of the Senate.
We don't pray for a victory. I grew up in a political family that we don't pray for the victory, but you pray that God's will be done.
The Speaker's gavel in the House is still up for grabs. And deadly campus shooting.
It's sad that we have to go through this as college students.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The superpowers sit down as the United States and China look to cool tensions. Welcome to Faith Nation in Washington, D.C. I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, the first in-person meeting between the leaders of the world's two largest economies. President Biden meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in their first face-to-face as heads of state. This amid intensifying tensions around the world over Taiwan, trade, and the war in Ukraine. The CBN News senior Washington correspondent Tara Merchner has our top story. Tara?
There are clear differences in policy, but both sides say they are open to finding common ground and easing tensions.
We share responsibility, in my view, to show that China and the United States can manage our differences, prevent competition from becoming anything ever near conflict, and to find ways to work together on urgent global issues.
The hope is the 3-hour meeting in Indonesia will lead to an improvement in rapidly deteriorating relations. Tensions are said to have led to a decline in cooperation on issues. The U.S. and China once shared common interests like combating climate change and containing North Korea's nuclear program. The White House says Biden and Xi agreed a nuclear war should never be fought in Ukraine.
We discussed Russia's aggression against Ukraine, reaffirmed our shared belief in the threat or the use of nuclear weapons is totally unacceptable.
President Biden also says he brought up concerns about human rights violations in China and its aggression toward Taiwan. Those tensions heightened last summer after Beijing ramped up military drills following House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit.
I absolutely believe there need not be a new Cold War, and I do not think there's any imminent attempt on the part of China to invade Taiwan, and I made it clear that our policy on Taiwan has not changed at all.
The Biden administration says it's not expecting to come away from the meeting with specific deliverables, only a better understanding of each country's goals and perspectives. In another sign both sides hope to improve relations, there are plans for Secretary of State Antony Blinken to visit China.
There was some drama at the meeting when a member of the Chinese delegation yanked and shoved a U.S. journalist who was trying to ask about human rights. In Washington, I'm Tara Merchner, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Tara. Well, Brent Sadler is a senior fellow for naval warfare and advanced technology at the Heritage Foundation, and he joins us now. Brent, welcome. So let's start right there with the drama that unfolded right in front of the press over China's human rights abuses. Is the U.S. doing enough to confront China over its human rights abuses, especially against the Uyghur people?
No, absolutely not. In the final weeks of the President Trump's administration, it was remarkable that they came out and clearly articulated what was happening to the Uyghurs as genocide. And that was a statement that was reiterated by President Biden shortly after he came into office. But there's been very little actually meaningful action taken on that, both on the world stage. More needs to be done.
The president made a lot of headlines, of course, with this meeting. One thing that made headlines was what he didn't bring up, fentanyl, many ingredients made in China, and COVID. Your thoughts on that? Was that a missed opportunity?
Absolutely. I think that not bringing up fentanyl and bringing up the ongoing issues and combating COVID is a missed opportunity. It's also a very obvious difference of opinion, I think, on the two governments, at least on their approach. China still has COVID-0 policies, which impact directly our economy and our industry. On fentanyl, there's probably a difference of national interest. It's not impacting China. In fact, elements there are making money on it, so why would they clamp down on it? In the United States, it's actually leading to well over 100,000 deaths a year directly affecting our youth in the United States.
Yeah, to be fair, did the president kind of have to, pick and choose? It was a 3-hour meeting. They couldn't talk about everything. But do you think that he should have brought up some of these issues? Were they just as important?
Absolutely. 3 hours, usually having run some of these meetings in the past myself, when you have translators cut it in half, that's still in 90 minutes. I think fentanyl and the loss of 100,000 American lives certainly is a topic worthy of bringing up and diving in more directly as to what China isn't doing on helping us combat this. In fact, China has a history that they have themselves with opium, fighting that in the 30s as well. So if there was a country, a regime that understands that this is works against their interest, they should know that firsthand from their own history.
So President Biden, he's intensified the trade conflict, upping the trade between the U.S. and China after former President Trump slapped tariffs on $50 billion in Chinese goods back in 2018. How high are the stakes for the global economy, Brent?
Well, I think many of the actions that we're seeing, the tariffs that you saw begun under Trump, many said that was going to be meaningless, actually have had some effect. It's actually brought the Chinese to the negotiating table in some occasions. But I think there's still far more to be done on the economic front, and there's going to be a lot more back and forth between our two countries in the coming weeks and months on this. But of course, COVID and the global recession that's starting to settle in is definitely going to dampen any real growth or any real forward momentum we're going to see in either of our economies.
Tensions only intensifying between the two powers over Taiwan, North Korea, and the war in Ukraine. Do you think this 3-hour meeting was enough to prevent the U.S. and China competition from turning into a new Cold War?
Well, I think the fundamentals actually, basically, it doesn't really matter that they met or didn't, because the fundamentals of our two nations' national interests are working increasingly across purposes. That being said, it's when the opportunity is there that to articulate clearly each other's national interest, some of that quietly out of public view is definitely important. Unfortunately, in the case of our president, too often the message has been muddled or confusing. In this case, on Taiwan in particular, the message has been confusing, to say the least.
All right, Brent Sadler with the Heritage Foundation. We will leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, President Biden is touting victory for Democrats, the party holding on to control of the Senate after big wins in Arizona and Nevada this weekend. The House is still up for grabs, but it does look like Republicans will be able to flip it. Given that, President Biden is putting the issue of codifying Roe and access to abortion on the back burner.
I don't think there's enough votes to codify unless something happens unusual in the House. I think we're going to get very close in the House, but I think it's going to be very close, but I don't think we're going to make it.
After a disappointing election for Republicans, the GOP is scrambling to figure out what went wrong and bickering over who's to blame for the red wave that wasn't. Dale Hurd has more.
Members of the upcoming 118th Congress are arriving in Washington to an uncertain post-election landscape, with control of the House still undecided and party leadership in flux. Republicans are expected to win the 6 seats needed to capture the House majority. But Democratic Senate wins in Arizona and Nevada keeps the Senate under Democratic control, with some calling the election results a rejection of GOP extremism.
This election, Nevadans rejected the far-right politicians working to divide us.
I'm incredibly pleased by the turnout, and I think it's a reflection of the quality of our candidates.
Republicans are trying to figure out how, despite one of the worst economies in decades and one of the most unpopular presidents in recent times, the predicted red wave fizzled. Now begins the finger-pointing among Republicans and the scramble for party leadership. Some blame Trump-backed candidates losing as the reason for Republican losses, and some blame Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
There's probably a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. Candidate quality has a lot to do with the outcome.
Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, who voted to impeach former President Trump, says he supports Senator Mitch McConnell to continue as leader.
We have to be a party about the future. And so if we're talking about the future of the American voter, she'll make her choice.
Party of the future is another way of saying no more Donald Trump in 2024. Meanwhile, Republicans are still hoping to flip Georgia's Senate seat in a December runoff.
The most important thing we can do is elect Herschel Walker to make sure that we can keep the pressure on Democrats in the Senate.
Even if Walker wins, Vice President Kamala Harris will still cast the deciding vote. In the House, some are questioning whether Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has enough support to become Speaker. In a scenario deemed unthinkable just a week ago, Speaker Nancy Pelosi is still hoping for a miracle that would allow her to retain her post.
We don't pray for a victory. I grew up in a political family. You don't pray for the victory, but you pray that God's will be done.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump is still expected to formally announce his 2024 presidential run Tuesday night, even though some are calling on him to wait. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, 3 university football players shot and killed. What we know next. Three football players at the University of Virginia were shot and killed after returning from a school field trip in Washington, D.C. last night. Tonight we know their names: wide receivers Devin Chandler and Lavelle Davis Jr. and linebacker Deshaun Perry.
The bodies of Devin and Deshaun, as President Ryan indicated, were found inside a charter bus where they had been for the day enjoying a school activity, having a meal together, and coming back to our grounds, and someone amongst them chose to do an act of violence.
The university identified the alleged gunman as Christopher Darnell Jones Jr., a student and former football player at the university. The shooting happened on a bus in a parking garage near the center of campus. The students were returning from a play in Washington, D.C. when the gunman opened fire. Jones is charged with 3 counts of second-degree murder and 3 counts of using a handgun, committing a felony. Tonight, as former President Donald Trump prepares to announce his 2024 bid for the presidency, former Vice President Mike Pence is breaking his silence over the January 6 riots breaching the Capitol. The former VP, in an exclusive interview, detailing his experience inside the Capitol that day.
The president tweets, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. It angered me. But I turned to my daughter, who was standing nearby, and I said, it doesn't take courage to break the law. It takes courage to uphold the law. I mean, the president's words were reckless. It was clear he decided to be part of the problem.
Pence telling ABC News that the former president's words on January 6th, quote, endangered me and my family and everyone at the Capitol. Pence releases his memoir, So Help Me God, tomorrow. And with that, let's bring in Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council. Tony, good evening. Good to have you with us. So
Thanks.
We have the Pence book coming out tomorrow. Former President Trump also expected to announce his 2024 bid. Do you think this timing is a coincidence?
Who knows? I think the president, former President Donald Trump, is trying to be back in the news cycle. I don't know where that's going to go, his announcement. I think a lot of the focus right now is on who's going to control the House of Representatives. The Senate appearing to be decided over the weekend. People want to know, are we going to have Republicans in control of the House of Representatives or not? I think that's the focus.
No. You know, there a lot of finger pointing going on with last week's midterm election. A lot of people blaming President Trump, saying that he backed candidates who they didn't support. Your thoughts on that, Tony? Who gets the blame here?
Well, I mean, look, I think, first off, there'll be time to do assessments of this. And I do think there was some candidates that were a little weak, that were artificially pumped up in the primaries, and I think maybe those were some of the ones that Donald Trump supported. But look, I think right now it's not a time for the Republicans to be taking shots at one another. I think we need to, how do we go forward? How do we address the crisis situation that the Biden administration, their policies have created. I'm very optimistic. Been on the phone today talking with members of the House of Representatives, Republican members, as they try to chart a path forward to try to provide checks and balances to the Biden administration. It's going to be one chamber that's going to really have to hold the line against these policies.
So Republicans, they have underperformed, of course, in the midterms. Conservative school board members, though, were overwhelmingly elected across the country. Tony, what do you make of that?
You know, it's good news. It's certainly good news, but it's troubling to. I'm still having a hard time trying to figure out, because generally speaking, down ballot races do not outperform the upper ballot, the top of the ballot. And so there's some things that just do not add up. And I think one of the things that we have to talk about after this election is how we're conducting elections. Election day has turned into election month. I mean, we're still counting ballots or waiting for those ballots to come in from places like California. I mean, we still have some districts in California where slightly over half of the votes have been counted. I mean, we're one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, but yet we can't hold our elections in a timely manner. We've got to address these things.
As for the Democrats' agenda on the Hill, Tony, as President Biden enters the lame duck portion of his term, the president said today that Democrats' objectives of codifying Roe is out. What about issues like codifying same-sex marriage or even funding the government with a short-term spending bill set to expire next month?
Big concerns. I think Senator Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, has said that he's going to push forward with this so-called Respect for Marriage Act, which is a huge threat to religious freedom. This would essentially give a green light to those who want to persecute people of faith. And so now is the time for people to weigh in with their United States senators. And I would encourage them to give them a phone call even now. The Capitol switchboard number is 202-224-3121. That's 202-224-3121, because their two senators need to hear from this, because this is a real threat. This Respect for Marriage Act is a real threat to religious liberty.
Okay, Tony Perkins on tonight.
Good to see you. Thanks so much.
Well, the tide is turning in the war in Ukraine. Coming up, hear from the people of the recently liberated city of Kherson. Welcome back. As we turn overseas to the war in Ukraine, President Biden today applauding Ukraine for retaking the city of Kherson as the ongoing conflict stretches into another winter.
I think you're going to see things slow down a bit because of the winter months and the inability to move as easily around the country. But I think it remains to be seen exactly what the outcome will be, except that I'm confident that Russia will not occupy or defend Ukraine as they intended from the beginning.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Kherson today after the Russians withdrew in the latest setback to Vladimir Putin's invasion. Chuck Holton reports.
After Kherson was abandoned by the Russian army, Ukrainian soldiers entering the city were immediately ambushed, though not by the enemy. Beleaguered residents rushed them with tearful hugs and kisses. Not long before, civilians shouted at the last Russian troops fleeing for the east bank of the Dnieper River. As soon as they had gone, these young people set about tearing down posters the Russians had put up.
You have to have something which you live for, and this was the moment to live for. Liberation is not something happening every year. It's something in 5 generations, and it's a moment to stay.
For residents who suffered under Russian occupation, the last 9 months have been full of terror.
We knew only fear. We were afraid of everything. We were afraid of the sound of cars. We were afraid of using our telephones. We were hiding everything. We were hiding our kids.
More atrocities come to light with each passing mile, and Ukrainian authorities plan to thoroughly investigate them all. Kherson was spared destruction seen in other battles because the liberation came without the brutal house-to-house fighting normally required to dislodge an entrenched enemy. They did it by the clever use of 2 particular weapons, and you might be surprised to find most of the fighting was being done from underground. I visited the front lines in Kherson during the last days of the battle. If you're a soldier in this conflict, the most dangerous thing that can happen is being seen by the enemy, because if they know where you are, they can shoot you. So I'm embedded with a unit right on the front lines, and I want to show you their headquarters, but I have to be very careful about how I do that so that I don't give away their position. Miles from Russian troops, deep in a hand-dug bunker, commanders monitor troop movements via a fleet of off-the-shelf drones broadcasting over a Starlink internet connection. Once an enemy tank is identified, the location is relayed to an artillery unit, which loads a GPS-guided artillery shell provided by the United States. The results speak for themselves. Now, experts say Russia's options are decreasing rapidly.
So missile attacks is pretty much the only thing they have to make Ukraine suffer. But that tactic is not working. And we have seen, since Russia destroyed almost 40% of Ukrainian energy grid, Ukraine still maintains its functioning, and Western assistance is actually increasing, not decreasing.
But here in Kherson, it will be a long time before things get back to normal.
It's difficult to live here. There is no water, no electricity, no heating, it's freezing, there is no internet. We are surviving the best we can.
While residents are eager to rebuild, now is the time to celebrate. It might be almost winter, but for the people of Ukraine, today feels like springtime. From Kherson, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Still ahead, hitched without a hitch. Tropical Storm Nicole didn't stop this group from a glamorous wedding. Finally tonight, an elegant wedding in the midst of Hurricane Nicole. Tiffany Trump, daughter of former President Donald Trump, married Michael Boulos after a 2-year engagement. The arrival of Hurricane Nicole paused wedding preparations in Palm Beach, Florida last week, but the Saturday ceremony at Mar-a-Lago, the president's residence, continued as planned. The bride chose a gown created by a Lebanese designer, a nod to her husband's heritage. Despite a few public appearances during her father's term as president, Tiffany is reportedly close to her half-siblings, and as you can see here, was escorted down the aisle by her father. Eric and Laura Trump were also married at Mar-a-Lago back in 2014, and there are the Trump ladies. There she is with her sister, Ivanka. A beautiful wedding, and congratulations to the happy couple. That's going to do it for Faith Nation this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.